In 11.3b, they're basically going to expect you to be able to do what you did in 11.2, which is completing the square. And now instead of having that option where you square rooted a negative, you said no solution. Well, now that you've done 11.3a and you know how to pull out the imaginary unit I, they're going to have that as a possible answer in your work. So if you are a person who still is struggling with learning completing this square, what I wrote is that you should probably have your 11.2 notes out. There's 7 steps on there, and I didn't feel like having you write it over again. Those 7 steps are right there. You already wrote them down. There's no reason to write them down again. So if you need to go back, click on the old notes or whatever it is that you need and take a look at it, because that's what you're going to do. The only difference is you'll be square rooting a negative, and if you square root a negative, pull out that imaginary unit I as you put your final answer there. Okay. Other reminders: you cannot add I, like 2I can only be added with another 2I or a 3I. You cannot add 2I plus 7 because those are not like terms. Only add i's with other i's, but you can multiply them. And do not combine it with constants. Always don't forget a plus or minus sign when square rooting a quantity squared. So I picked 1, 6, 10, 15, and 18 to do with you. Since you have your notes out already, or your worksheet in your hand, let's go ahead and do a couple of these together. It says solve the following. Step 1's already done. The C is already on the other side. Step 2 is just putting in that underscore where something goes in there. Step 3 says you add something in the underscore. Hopefully you remember what it is. It's half of b squared. What's b? 6. What's half of it? 3. We add 3 squared to the left side in the underscore. We add 3 squared to the right side in the underscore. On the left-hand side, it's already going to factor. There's no extra work you have to do. You have to know that this made that perfect squared trinomial. It's going to go into something squared every single time that we've just completed the square, which means this is going to factor to what? To x plus the thing times itself squared, 3. X plus 3 squared. The right-hand side, there is a little work to do. Negative 13 plus 9, which makes negative 4. Now we want to get rid of this squared term. The opposite of squaring is square rooting. This is where I said don't forget that there's 2 possible answers for that, a positive possibility and a negative. We put that plus or minus sign in front of that radical. These 2 things essentially cross each other off, and you're left with x plus 3. Now, what we did in 11.3 is we said we cannot square root a negative unless we use the imaginary unit I. Remember how I told you if you factored out, if square root of negative 1 was just I, you can just think of it like square rooting that negative, it makes an I pop out. Square rooting 4, what's the square root of 4? So then what we're going to do is we're going to call this plus or minus 2I. Now we have x plus 3 equals plus or minus 2y. The only other thing we need to do is subtract 3 and subtract 3. We put that minus 3 in front of the plus or minus. This is your final answer. You cannot put together the -3 and the 2i. They're not like terms. You can only combine i's with other i's, -3's with other numbers or constants. That's where you stop. The answers are not that difficult. Just know that none of your answers really come out to nice whole numbers hardly anymore. We're past that stage. Number 6. Move the C value first. What's the C value? Which number is the C value? If you know, say it out loud. I heard 2 people say it. I heard 5 people say it. We're going to move the 7. The opposite of adding 7 is subtracting 7. That makes this x squared minus 10x underscore equals -7 underscore. I'm leaving spaces to put something there. We're going to complete the square. What goes in the space? Half of b squared. Half of 10 squared is adding -5 squared. -5 times -5 is adding 25. Same thing. Which means this side is going to factor perfectly. The other side we're going to have to work out. 25 minus 7 is 18. Square root, square root. Don't forget the plus or minus sign. And you can do this by hand where you go 2 times 9, 3 times 3, and you're looking for your pairs of squares. Or you can break out your calculator and put in square root of 18 and see what it reduces to. Because our calculators can do things in radical form. I'm trying to see if I can get that in the light. Where does the 3 go? It goes right here. Plus or minus, the 3 pops out there. Root 2. We're going to add 5. And add 5. The 5 we're going to put in front of this plus or minus sign. So our final answer is 5 plus or minus 3 root 2. The answers are not whole numbers anymore. They're these decimals, these radicals that just make it look a little bit funny, but that's what our answer is. We just got to get comfortable with it. That is not what I wanted to do with you. So then, number 10, we're just supposed to simplify. If there's nothing in front of the parentheses for number 10, you don't do anything with it. But if there is something in front of the parentheses, you got to do something with it, like distribute that negative. Change those signs. Do the opposite of. And then you can combine like terms, like 7 take away 5 makes 2. And 3i plus 8i is 11i. And that's our answer in standard form because we can't put those together. Number 15, though, if they have 2i to the 5th power, that means you have 2i times another 2i times another 2i times another 2i times another 2i. Now for me, what I like to do is I could just do 2 times 2 is 4. 4 times 4 is 16. Times by 2 is 32. I do all the numbers first. 2 to the 5th is 32. And then what I do is I start taking the i's and go I times I is I squared, which we learned what that simplifies to our last class. Was that yesterday? That was last Friday. This I squared simplifies to -1. So if I know that this is going to be a negative 1, it's going to multiply things by negative 1 instead. So I'm going to cross these ones off and put negative 1, and then I'm going to see that there's 2 more. This is going to be a negative 1. There's an I, and I know what negative 1 times negative 1 times I is. Negative times a negative is a positive. My final answer is 32i. You always simplify the I to the 5th power and put it in something smaller. The last thing that we do, the last example is number 18. If it says 2 plus 7i squared, it's 2 plus 7i times another 2 plus 7i, and you need to remember how to FOIL. First times first. First times the outside. Inside. Last. These two things will go together. 14i plus 14i, which is 28i. But the last thing times the last thing was 49i squared. We talked about what I squared always makes. And you got to get used to this because this is going to be in throughout this whole chapter. I squared turns into negative 1. And that means 49 is going to change signs. It's going to go from a positive to a negative. That's fine. So what I do with these I squareds is usually I will change this thing to something negative right below it. Like it just changes that sign. And now 49, 4 minus 49, I think that's negative 45. And we can't put those together, so that's my final answer. Thank you. And that's where I'm going to end your notes today.